Greetings, empowered investors. Welcome to episode 2305. Now, I want to just recap on a couple of things. Many of you joined us for our masterclass today. Thank you for joining us. I got excellent feedback on this masterclass, so thank you for that too. And it's just amazing to me how people think that there are some cases where you should pay off your mortgage. And there's really almost never a case for that. You pay tax on positive cash flow. Remember that. You don't get the mortgage interest deduction. So this could be on your own home, could be on an investment property. It's a little different either way, but either way, you should not pay off your mortgage. I did a video about, 7 years ago. It's one of the old ones on the YouTube channel. And it was where I was on a ship in the Baltic Sea? I think so. Anyway, I was on a cruise ship and I stood out there in the windy environment and I talked about, should you ever pay cash for a property or should you ever pay a property off? And really the only time I could ever come up with that makes sense, and it doesn't even really make sense, right? But here's the time when, you might do it. If you have so much cash that you just need to park your cash and you need a place to park it, right? And it is a personal residence, and it is in a state with really good homestead protection like Florida or Texas. That would be like the only time that you'd want to pay cash. And I did this myself. I kind of hate to admit this, but I bought a property and I just didn't want to deal with financing. I was very busy. And so I just plunked down cash, and I thought I'll just refi it later. And then the COVID era rates came along and I thought I would refi it then. And I just kept thinking I was going to sell the property and I just never got around to it, indecision, right? So I just sold that property a little over a year ago and it was free and clear when I sold it. So look, I don't always do what I say you should do. I'll freely admit that. It depends on your circumstances and your financial ability and your situation. That's one that I did do that with. But I think you should really always finance your properties. Remember, the best insurance is a high loan balance. If you have a natural disaster, if the property burns down, you don't want to have to go to battle with your insurance company. You want your lender to go to battle for you on your behalf. And that will be a much better situation because they're going to protect their collateral and your insurance company is likely to weasel on you, but they're not likely to weasel on a big lender like Chase with lots of money and lots of lawyers. So, there are so many reasons, but you want the inflation-induced debt destruction. So if you pay cash or if you have a low mortgage and you don't use high leverage, you're not going to get the inflation-induced debt destruction. So that's an important thing to remember. Besides, there's the tax situation, there's the inflation-induced debt destruction. There are all of these reasons that you really, really want to keep your properties leveraged. And as the equity grows over the years, you want to strip your equity and do my refi to die plan because that's what really, really makes sense. So I just wanted to remind you of that. Now, today we went over, and I know a lot of you love this because I love it too, the perpetual motion machine. That nobody was able to invent the perpetual motion machine. It's kind of a fascinating story, right? Over the last 100 years, probably much longer than that. But, I remember reading about how all these patents were filed for perpetual motion machines. And nobody could ever invent it because it defies the laws of physics. It can't be done, at least not with what we know now and what we knew then. But with income property, you really can have a perpetual motion machine. Because how I've talked about the leveraged buyout and how you want to think like a Wall Street tycoon and do LBOs or leveraged buyouts. So what is a leveraged buyout? Let's just review. This became famous in the 80s with all these corporate raiders and, bigwigs, T. Boone Pickens, Carl Icahn, Ivan Boesky, all the rest of them. You remember those names. So what they would do is they would find a company that they want to acquire. They try to buy this company, and to do the acquisition, they wouldn't use their own money. They would load it up with debt. They would put as much debt, as much leverage on that company as possible, like I want you to do with your real estate. And then they would make the company, out of its income, out of its cash flow, pay the debt back. So it was self-liquidating debt. And that's exactly the opportunity we have with rental properties. And it's even better because you can get some positive cash flow out of it. So the leveraged buyout is a fantastic strategy. Now, probably none of our listeners have ever or will ever do a leveraged buyout because you're not big wave billionaires on Wall Street. But you can do it on a smaller scale with your rental properties. And it's a fantastic strategy. So just follow my plan. Leverage up your properties. Let the tenant pay the debt for you, like the company paying back the debt out of its own cash flow, right? The property is self-liquidating debt. And then you get inflation-induced debt destruction too. So it's just such a phenomenal concept. Now, to extend all of this beyond the leveraged buyout, their perpetual motion machine that we talked about today on our masterclass, I wish you were there if you weren't there. I really wish you were there because everybody loved it. The perpetual motion machine says also use the cash flow that you get from the property. And with that cash flow, you save it until you have enough of a chunk to put a down payment on a property. And so the perpetual motion machine not only keeps your properties going and your portfolio going, but it actually buys you more properties. You get more properties for free over time with your perpetual motion machine. And if you're familiar with the book, it's a very famous book. It's called Good to Great by Jim Collins. Super famous book in the business and the corporate world. And this book, he talked about the flywheel. And that became a big thing that a lot of business people repeated, the idea of this flywheel. And, if you think of a big giant flywheel, right, it is heavy. It's hard to move. It's hard to start. It's hard to get it turning. But once you get it turning, now it's not perpetual motion completely, right? But it has a momentum of its own. And that's the same way it is with real estate investing. And this is the saddest story I can tell you, by the way. Over the 21 years that I've been helping investors, 100% investors now, when I was in the traditional real estate business before this, I helped a lot of investors as well, but not the way I do it now. The saddest thing I see is the investor who has some bump in the road, some bad experience, and listen, you're going to have them. Real estate it's not free. You're not going to get rich for free. There's no free ride, okay? You're going to have problems. You're going to have frustrations. You're going to have losses, right? But the winners are the people that have the emotional stability to put up with those losses and those frustrations and just keep going until their flywheel really gets moving for them. And the saddest story is the people that just quit. I've told you the story before about my first rental property. I was 20 years old. I bought my first rental property from a client of mine. He wanted to sell it. He wanted me to list it for him. And I said, hey, his name was Jim. I said, Jim, I want to buy it from you. And that was my first rental property. And guess what? My very first tenant, I'm looking like this total baby, right? Trying to collect the rent. And they didn't respect me at all. So they just stopped paying the rent and figured, what am I going to do, right? And so I had to evict them. I had to evict my first tenant. My first experience at age 20 was a bad experience, you could argue. I did end up selling the property and making some money on the property, but I was frustrated. And listen, no one would have ever blamed me if I would have given up at that point. But wow, I just imagine the course of my life and how different it would have been if I didn't keep going. If I didn't buy my next property, and make all that money on all these properties over the years, big and small, single family homes, I made small fortune on those. I did some big apartment deals, made a fortune on those. It's just the best asset class. You cannot beat income property, the most historically proven asset class in the entire world, the most tax-favored asset class in America, taxes being the largest expense any of us have. So whatever you face along the way, do not give up, okay? The future belongs to the bold. Right now, the past 3 years has been a very boring time in real estate. Prices have been going up modestly. Activity's been way down. Everybody keeps waiting for the interest rates to decline, and they haven't. Now, think about it. After the rates went up, 3 years ago, give or take, imagine if you would have purchased several properties then. You'd have a higher interest rate, but you would have had appreciation since then, okay? And, I know the rental market's kind of boring. It's a little bit anemic. Depends on the area. All real estate's very local, of course, but just keep going, persist. As Warren Buffett says, be greedy when everyone is fearful, be fearful when everyone is greedy. And I don't think people are terribly fearful right now. I think they're just kind of bored. It's just kind of a lackluster type of market we're in. But this is the kind of market to buy in. I'm shopping for a home for myself right now, a personal residence, an expensive one. And I got to tell you, it feels fantastic. I have so many choices and so many options. It's just a wonderful experience to be a buyer right now. Lots of selection compared to a couple of years ago when I was doing this, trying to buy a high-end home. Oh, there was no selection. So yeah. Anyway, if you want to join our pro membership, Empowered Investor Pro, go to empoweredinvestor.com and get your membership for a lot less than a cost of a decent gym, health club. This will make you financially healthy. We meet every month on Zoom, small group meetings, and it's really a great time to learn more and network with fellow investors and so forth like that. So that, and then our next masterclass, remember they're the second Wednesday of every month. Our next one, we will announce that in, probably a week or two, but always the same link every month for that. It's jasonhartman.com/Wednesday because it's always on the second Wednesday of the month. jasonhartman.com/Wednesday.